If you find anything more alarmist than that, I will delete my entire channel. We got hot Jesus over here, y'all. And which side looks more like the side that's trying to fearmonger for money? Witches. Really? Welcome back to this little channel where we have fun getting skeptical about all kinds of pseudoscientific nonsense, with a personal favorite of mine, of course, being climate science denial. I've just always thought climate science was really fascinating, and I've learned a lot about it. And in these learnings, I have, of course, become aware of the various skeptical scientists that challenge the mainstream view on climate change, one of whom is an Australian geologist named Ian Plimer. He's been active in the space for, I think, like 15 years, maybe a little bit longer. And basically all he does is try to find ways to sling mud at anthropogenic climate change. And I'm bringing him up now because Mr. Plimer recently appeared on a rather popular YouTube channel called Triggernometry on March 8th of this year. I know nothing about this channel, but I do know something about Ian Plimer, so I gave it a watch. Mr. Plimer was professor of geology until I believe around 2012. All his actual peer-reviewed papers appear to be around just that, geology, mainly as it pertains to mining, which was his specialty, maybe a few other adjacent topics. But from what I can tell, it was somewhere around 2009 that he started wading into the world of climate denial. And really, since retiring in 2012, he has appeared to be dedicating a substantial amount of time to it. He gives speeches, he goes on podcasts, he writes books. I think he's up to 9 or 10 now, all about climate change denial, including a couple, by the way, where the target audience is children. A lot of people like to emphasize his connection to the mining industry. I don't really like to talk about people's motives or whatever on this channel. I prefer to focus on what they actually say and show the hard evidence for why it is wrong. And that's what we're gonna do. So the video starts off with kind of typical, Eric Weinstein style, Mr. Plimer, telling us how super duper smart he is, how he skipped a grade of school, how much he really likes rocks. I'm gonna skip over that, and I'm generally gonna skip most discussions about economics or policy as well. I did try to group the clips about related talking points together so we can have some form of organization to this video. More than I can say for the original, really. It kind of meandered all over the place. So, but we're going to focus mainly on the scientific points that he makes. So let's see how we do with our geologist from down under.
If you're to promote an idea in science, it has to be commensurate with all the other validated work in science.
Wow, off to a surprisingly great start. He is 100% right about that. Absolutely. Let's see how he does on that.
Right across the board in geology, people object to this new religion of climate science. Right across the board in geology, you'll find people just say, oh, that's just rubbish. You can count on a sawmiller's hand the number of geologists who would agree with popular paradigm.
He said you can count on one hand. He said a sawmiller's hand, so even less than 5, the number of geologists that agree with anthropogenic climate change. That's the claim. So let's see. Here is the Geological Society of London, the oldest geological society in the world, has over 12,000 members. The geological record provides powerful evidence that atmospheric CO2 concentrations drive climate change and supports multiple lines of evidence that greenhouse gases emitted by human activities are altering the Earth's climate. We also have the Geological Society of America, the American Geophysical Union, the American Geosciences Institute, the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics, and the European Geosciences Union, all agreeing that the warming we are seeing today is due to greenhouse gas emissions. I don't know how many members in total all of these groups put together would be, but it's got to be more than 5, right? Let's say at least. Let's say it's at least 5. All right, we're both right. I'll give them that one.
The one thing you see when you look at the IPCC reports is there's no geology. There's no paleontology. And they're the clues to what seawater temperature might have been. They're the clues to what sea levels are doing.
Yeah, so that's also a load of crap. The 4th report, for example, had an entire 50-page chapter dedicated to paleoclimatology. And the 5th assessment report had an 82-page chapter. Paleoclimatology certainly has overlaps with geology all over the place. But I mean, of course, the IPCC reports are not going to have pure geology. They aren't going to have chapters on mineralogy or petrology. Like, that's not the scope of the reports. The scope is about climate change, right? AR5 did include some nice deep dive temperature records using geological proxies too, like this one right there. Several of the volunteer authors of the reports are also geologists. such as Richard Alley, lead author for the fourth assessment report. Also, Daniel Olago, Daryl Kaufman, Eystein Jansen, Jean-Claude Duplessis, Jessica Tierney, Jonathan Overpeck, and Tim Naish, to name a few more. Not to mention the dozens of other geologists whose work was directly cited across the many tens of thousands of references to peer-reviewed studies that the IPCC reports include. So yeah, claiming no geology in the IPCC, weird thing to lie about.
We also had seen cycles of climate in the past where we've had very, very warm periods, we've had very cold periods, we've had 6 major ice ages. We're currently in one of those ice ages. It started 34 million years ago. And during that time, carbon dioxide has changed enormously. It was unrelated to temperature. It never has been in the past, so I can't see why it has to be in the present. About 500 million years ago, when we had an explosion of life, we had 0.7% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's gone down to 0.04%. Where's it gone? It's gone into the rocks, into sediments. Now, during that 500 million years, we've had 3 major ice ages, yet carbon dioxide has been going down over time.
Right. So here's a chart of CO2 over the past 450 million years. First of all, at no point is it anywhere close to 7,000 parts per million. And second, what we do see is it fluctuating quite a bit. And as for those 3 major ice ages he's talking about, they are here, here, and here. The Andean Saharan, the Karoo, and the late Cenozoic. And notice when you actually look at them, they actually do occur near minima of CO2 levels.
There's no relationship between temperature and carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide has changed enormously. It was unrelated to temperature. It never has been in the past, so I can't see why it has to be in the present.
Yeah, kind of looks like they were related during those ice ages, at least those 3 major glaciation events. But then here he tweaks the argument.
So for ice cores, the original ice cores that were drilled used volcanic eruptions and dated the ash and the acid in those cores. And then you could work out the rate of ice deposition. And then with that, as snow falls and is compressed into ice, it traps little bits of air, and you can extract that air and measure the amount of carbon dioxide in it. You can also, from chemical fingerprints in the ice, you can work out at what temperature it formed. So then you get a correlation between carbon dioxide and temperature and time. And that showed a perfect relationship. You could see these Milankovitch cycles, you could see the 3 cycles, and you could see that carbon dioxide followed exactly the temperature. But with more detailed sampling, a totally different story came out. And the story was that you will get a period of natural warming, and some 600 to 1,600 years later, you get an increase in carbon dioxide.
Right. So here he's talking about the ice core records. Vostok, for example, goes back 400,000 years, something like that. Even though the Earth was in an ice age the whole time, it had several warm interglacial periods, including the one we are in right now. During these periods, we clearly see both CO2 and temperature changing together. His point is that according to the Antarctic ice core records, the temperature rose before the CO2, which for some unexplained reason he thinks is meaningful. Because even with a lag, you have to remember these warming events took thousands of years, while the lag was only a few hundred years, which means most of the warming was perfectly consistent with CO2 as the driver, just as a feedback rather than a forcing. But it gets more interesting than that too, because according to Shakun 2012, what we're actually seeing in these records is that initial warming was indeed happening, but only in Antarctica. This is the only place where we actually had that lag. And this is why that lag shows up in the Antarctic ice core records. But the Antarctic warming led to a CO2 release sufficient to then cause the rest of the planet to warm. Temperature was the trigger, which released the CO2 that amplified and globalized the warming trend. And yeah, it would be nice if we had a perfect analogy to the Industrial Revolution in the ice core records, but we don't. And again, that shouldn't be a terrible surprise, right? The closest analogy that we do have, we have to go way far back, farther than we can hope to get ice core records for. That would be the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, or PETM. It is an event where it is believed that a huge amount of CO2 was released abruptly into the atmosphere, causing a warming of between 5 to 8 C. And of course, it is studied a lot by modern day climatologists because it is the best analogy that we have in the geological record for what we're seeing today.
And we see in the rocks that when you can back calculate how much carbon dioxide was in the atmosphere, that we've had for the last 500 million years a decrease in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's dangerously low. If we halved it, we'd have no vegetation. So I could see that all of these ideas coming out on climate change were total nonsense.
I love this characterization. Like we're on this doomsday course of falling CO2 for 500 million years. So we started the Industrial Revolution with about 280 parts per million up to around 420 today. To find CO2 levels matching today, you'd have to go back around 3 million years. So that means that over the period from 3 million years ago until we started to significantly industrialize and reverse that trend, CO2 levels were falling at a rate of about 1 part per million per 25,000 years. Having it would therefore take another 3.5 million years, assuming it would even continue falling at all, which I would like to see some evidence for. But we'll never know, because instead we have put back 3 million years worth of natural CO2 decline in about 100 years. But hey, why talk about actual facts when you can fearmonger about how all the plants are going to die and how these heroic fossil fuel companies are fighting off this fate? Speaking of fear-mongering alarmism, by the way, I didn't show this yet. The book he's plugging on this podcast during this interview, literally called Green Murder. Complete with like horror movie colors, oh so scary. And then he claims that it's the scientists, the IPCC, they are the ones trying to scare you. Not me with my book called Green Murder. I'm not trying to scare anybody for money. It's the IPCC. Tell you what, take any IPCC report. If you find anything more alarmist than that, I will delete my entire channel.
The second thing is we've had times in the past when the carbon dioxide content of the atmosphere was at least 10% and perhaps 20% compared with 0.04%. And what did we have then? We had the biggest ice ages this planet's ever enjoyed. And this is when we had kilometres of ice at the equator at sea level.
20% of the atmosphere is CO2. That's 200,000 parts per million if it's 20% of the atmosphere. He's saying that is when we had the biggest ice ages of all time. Okay, 200,000 parts per million, that's his claim. Let's look at it. So there have been 5 glaciation events in Earth's 4.5 billion year history. I already mentioned the Andean Saharan, the Karoo, and the late Cenozoic. The other 2 are the Huronian and the Cryogenian. 4 out of 5 of them occurred in just the last 700 million years, when CO2 was on average only around 900 parts per million, not 200,000. And anyway, when you get on these kinds of timescales, hundreds of millions of years, these are geological timescales, you get into things like continental drift that affects ocean currents and where land is, the balance of the sun's radiation. It's much more likely that these kind of longer term effects are going to dominate over a CO2 signal just because they are quite powerful. You do maybe get some galactic cycles too. I mean, 700 million years, point being, is quite a chunk of time. The planet, the continents, they morph into unrecognizable versions of themselves during this time frame. You can see this nice animation here from the University of Adelaide, actually where Ian Plimer used to work. This can affect climate too. No climate scientist ever said that CO2 is the only possible factor that can affect climate. That would be a straw man argument. What is said is it is the best explanation for a very specific warming event, the one that you don't have to be a geologist to care about, the one since the 20th century. Now, I said 4 out of 5 glaciation events are recent in the last 700 million years. But based on his 200,000 parts per million claim, he is no doubt referring to the oldest one, the first one, which is the Huronian. And this one you really, really have to go far back. Remember, all the other ones were within the last 700 million years. The Huronian, 2.5 billion years ago. And yes, CO2 was much higher than today. Still nowhere near the 10% or 20% like he claims. It was more like 1%, which is still a big number. Still, it's 10 times less than what he said it was, but it's still big, right? But you see, because of how far back we had to go to find that, 2.5 billion years, this one actually becomes quite easy to explain despite the high CO2. Because at 2.5 billion years, guys, we have graduated from geological time. We are now on cosmic timescales. We're talking like 18% of the entire age of the universe back. And when you go that far back, our planet, our sun, we're at less than half of their current ages. Stars get hotter as they get older, so the sun was significantly less bright back then. It was only about 80% of its current brightness. CO2 was helping, but that dim sun was actually pretty challenging to overcome. And in fact, if CO2 alone were in the atmosphere, it is likely the Earth's oceans would have been permanently frozen solid because of just how weak the sun still was. They weren't, generally, and that it's believed that it's because methane, a much more powerful greenhouse gas, was also extremely abundant back then.
That's not driven by carbon dioxide. That's driven by something else, like that great ball of heat in the sky we call the sun.
Exactly. So how did the Huronian happen? Obviously, this was a long time ago, so any evidence we have is just bits and pieces with a lot of guessing in between. But one of the top ideas is that photosynthesizing bacteria had been churning out oxygen, churning it out for millions of years into an oxygen-depleted world. They were doing that with relatively little effect until a point about 2.5 billion years ago, we had the Great Oxidation Event. And this is exactly when the Huronian glaciation occurred. Oxygen is important to climate not because it's any kind of major cooling effect, but because it is devastating to that methane in the atmosphere. This influx of huge amounts of oxygen destroyed so much methane, converting it into CO2, a much weaker greenhouse gas, that it significantly dropped the radiative forcing of early Earth's atmosphere to the point where it could no longer compensate for this very weak sun. So if anything, rather than throwing anything into question, the existence of the Huronian actually does show perfectly well how important greenhouse gases are at affecting a planet's temperature. And that's why your argument about CO2 being so much higher in the past during the Huronian glaciation fails, because that would only matter if the science underpinning the attribution of the current global warming event, if that science required that there was never any other cause for temperature changes ever in the last 4.5 billion years, then yeah, maybe you would have a point. Like if 100 out of 100 of the last events, warming events in Earth's past, were not all solely due to CO2. Like if even a single one of those 100 events were caused by something else, these guys try to conclude, oh, see, the idea that the current warming might be driven by CO2 can't be true because you had that other time. It's like jumping into a swimming pool and concluding that it won't make your clothes wet because the rain makes your clothes wet. Right? And you go, no, that's stupid. What does the rain have to do with a swimming pool? And it's rain does it. Rain does it, so you're wrong.
And so an intelligent person like Boris Johnson might understand the classics, but he needs to go back a few more thousand years. Wow. But even if he did read the classics, he would know that in the time of Jesus, it was warmer than now.
He's talking about hotter in the time of Jesus. We got hot Jesus over here, y'all. Damn. No, not like that. No, not. Well, yeah, no, that's better, right? He's cooling himself off with the wine because it's so hot out, right? All right, hot Jesus, we got it. So we made a huge pivot, by the way, from 2.5 billion years ago to 2000. Geologically speaking, 2,000 years ago was like yesterday. The closer we get to today, the better data we have. And indeed, we have a plethora of proxies that go back 2,000 years, and they do not, in fact, find hot Jesus. 0 AD was just not significantly warmer than 2026, according to, for example, this study. Also here, and here. My favorite, though, has to be the Pages 2K study, the largest proxy study on historical temperature records ever. 60 different institutions from around the world participated, 6 continents represented, 8 different proxy methods, all coming together into a very comprehensive picture. And here it is. Except this graph actually stops in 2000. He said Jesus was hotter than now. 2025 was a lot warmer than 2000. If you put 2025 on this chart, we're actually here, way above where we were in the time of Jesus. What was your claim that it was warmer back then based on?
If you're to promote an idea in science, it has to be commensurate with all the other validated work in science.
One more time, please.
If you're to promote an idea in science, it has to be commensurate with all the other validated work in science.
Hallelujah. By the way, those hot Jesus images, not AI generated, they're actually real photographs, and the artist gave me permission to use them, so shout out Craig Ainsley.
Then in the medieval times, it was warmer than now. And then in the Middle Ages, we had the Little Ice Age. It was considerably colder than now.
Yes, the Middle Ages were considerably colder than now, obviously, because it's extremely warm now compared to when it was in the Middle Ages. But let's help him out. What he actually meant to say is that the Middle Ages were significantly colder than the centuries that preceded it. That's what he actually meant. But he's still wrong, because studies show there was no globally coherent cold or warm period over the past 2,000 years. What we had were a patchwork of regional events that look in no way whatsoever like the global warming trend that we are currently witnessing.
You operate on a time scale that the overwhelming majority of people have no way of even conceptualizing in their head, which is millions of years, hundreds of millions of years. And do you think that's part of the reason we're here? In the sense that I often think, like, if people saw the entire history of global temperatures and saw where we are on it, they would ask a lot more questions than anyone's been asking.
Yeah, I have a question. What the heck is going on at the end there? So yeah, they share this chart. It's from Wikipedia, a file called allpaleotemps.png. Normally I wouldn't show a chart like this, but it was in the video, so we should address it. You can see it has degrees C on the left and Fahrenheit on the right. And it's a little tricky to read because of the shifting x-axis scales there, but it's not that bad. So there's the Paleocene Eocene thermal maximum, by the way. Shout out PETM. The point of sharing this chart, of course, is to simply have you look at it and go, wow, look how crazy the Earth's temperatures have been. Yeah, that explains the warming we're seeing. And stop there and never think about it again. That's the point of showing a chart like this. Except there are some real key differences between the warming we are seeing now and any of those previous ones. One obvious thing, all of the warming events you see, except the one we are living right now, has already finished. So the magnitude is bigger by comparison. Ours is just getting started. But not only that, it is also going unusually fast compared to any of these older ones. Now, this graph is showing future points for 2050 and 2100 here. You can decide how likely you consider those to be. But we can, with much greater certainty, talk about the observed rate of warming that we have seen so far. It's kind of hard to do that on a chart that spans 500 million years, but luckily we don't have to. We have real data for the warming over, say, the past 50 years. This is when we really started to measure it well with satellites and all kind of things since about 1975. And since 1975, we have measured warming at a rate of about 2 degrees C per century. Are any of these spikes nearly that rapid? This one might seem like it has the best shot, right? This is the Eemian interglacial. And the warming spike is the warming due to the Milankovitch cycles plus feedbacks. And we can see from here it saw a warming of about 6C, and this warming took about 7,000 years or 70 centuries. 6 over 70, that's a rate of 0.0857 C per century. So today it is warming 24 times faster than what appears to be the most dramatic spike on this chart other than the current one. That's a difference between leisurely walking and driving at about 72 miles per hour, 115 kilometers per hour.
You've got to be very careful of the records. There are other records you can get from tree rings, from ice cores, and they tell us a different story.
Yes, tree rings do tell a different story. So he's talking about something called the divergence problem here, where tree ring data appears to track temperatures well historically, but start to diverge from the actual temperature data sets somewhere around the 1950s. And seemingly, he is a member of the camp that believes tree rings are therefore a better thermometer than a thermometer. Why? Because it's all he has. It's the only thing left that shows something that he likes, so he clings to it. That's it. I said they think they're better than a thermometer, but actually, to be accurate, you'd have to say they think tree rings are better than over 100,000 ground temperature stations around the world, thousands of different ocean floats, buoys, and ships, hundreds of flying weather balloons with measurement devices on them, over a dozen different satellites, reanalysis products like ERA5, glacier mass balance records, sea level rise, and for Mr. Geology, we can even see the warming trend in subsurface temperature measurements from boreholes. Now, you could try to desperately wave your hand and say all of these completely independent temperature measurements all magically have the same underlying bias, which he will later, by the way. Or you can conclude that they all just measure the same result because they're all measuring the same real value. Or you can just see all this and go, nah, I'm going to stick with the tree.
You can check it out. There's not one scientific paper there that demonstrates that human emissions drive global warming.
There's not one single paper that demonstrates that human emissions drive global warming, and that is very true. There's also not one single paper that demonstrates the full body of evidence for evolution by natural selection, for example, which is why creationists make this exact same argument. There's not one single paper that proves evolution. You might have some papers demonstrating some part of it, but not the entire thing. Because the unfortunate fact is, there is simply no law of nature that says the full body of evidence supporting the explanation of a particular phenomenon must be able to fit within a 10-page journal article. And that's exactly what he's demanding here. Because to demonstrate that human emissions drive global warming, you would have to demonstrate that the rise in CO2 is due to human activities, that CO2 is a greenhouse gas. I made 2 videos outlining most of the evidence for each of these, by the way. You would need to cite direct evidence for CO2's radiative forcing, calculations for how much radiative forcing should lead to how much warming, and how this is corroborated against paleoclimate records, etc. There's way more to it than that as well. You can't do all these things in a single paper. It's not possible. Like, you literally couldn't even take the microphone on your suit and define fully the body of human knowledge responsible for its ultimate unfortunate fate of recording your impossible childish demands. Maybe one paper can discuss one aspect of it in a comprehensive way. None are going to thoroughly explain all of the required information, all of the incremental accumulated human knowledge that went into manufacturing an electronic like that, all the way to the production of plastic from petroleum, the understanding of and generation of and distribution of the electricity that powers it. You can't fully define all of that in a single paper. Does that mean your microphone doesn't really work? Unfortunately not. So in my opinion, it's a pretty immature thing to be banging your fists on the ground demanding to see something impossible. By the way, what was your alternative explanation that you argue better explains the warming since the 20th century? Like, do you even have one? Because up until now, you've basically only made 2 arguments, which are nuh-uh and that's nonsense because I say so. And I'm sorry, I'm a skeptic. That's not good enough. It's not good enough for me. It shouldn't be good enough for you. So I'm asking, tell me what your alternative hypothesis is and show me the evidence, because that's what you do in science.
I say, show me. Show me the evidence, because that's what you do in science.
Oh, he does get it.
Show me the evidence, because that's what you do in science. Show me the evidence. Show me that the human emissions drive global warming. And if you can show me, then you've got to show me that the other emissions, which are natural, which are 97% of the emissions, don't drive global warming.
So yeah, every single greatest hit talking point is being regurgitated. I love it. So the point he's trying to argue here is that nature emits 97% of CO2 and humans emit 3%. Same claim the current administration's new Department of Energy tried to slip into its pathetic excuse for a scientific report, by the way. But he is asking us to show him why this is wrong. So he's asking for our help, you guys, and I respect that. So let's explain why that was such a stupid thing to say. This is the carbon cycle. Nature emits a lot of CO2. It's true. You can see the oceans emit 90, for example, compared to 7.7 for fossil fuels. This is actually from 2010. It's actually up to about 10 gigatons per year now, but never mind. The larger point that he's ignoring is that nature also absorbs a lot of CO2. He's just ignoring every arrow that goes in and counting only the ones that go out. Because indeed, if you sum up 58 plus 59 plus 90, 7.7 divided by that, you get about 3.7%. And that's it. That's his mistake. He's purposely ignoring half of the entire cycle. But he asked for our help, so let's keep going just in case. How about an analogy? Take an analogy, a bathtub. Bathtub, water go in at some rate, water leave through drain at same rate, level in tub stay same. Add new water, like fossil carbon that has been locked out of the cycle for millions of years. Suddenly introduce that as a new source, level in bathtub go up. Ice core records show us very well, too, that CO2 in the atmosphere was indeed balanced for thousands of years, then suddenly dramatically increased right when we started wide-scale combustion of fossil fuels. Isn't that a funny coincidence? Except it's not a coincidence, and we know for sure that it's not a coincidence for several reasons. First of all, we have simply very good records at the national level of how much CO2 is emitted because we calculate it in two completely independent ways. One by estimating consumption, like kilowatt hours and miles traveled and everything else that contributes, summing all of that up. And then the other way is accounting for the fuels. So you take what fuel is produced within the borders of a country, you take what it imports, and you subtract what it exports. So the movement of the fuel and the consumption numbers, two completely different methodologies. You take both of them, and they agree with each other typically within 1%. We do this every year. And it's not complicated to convert that into concentration increases each year. And those numbers are dead on with what we actually measure in terms of increases in CO2 year over year. So how can that increase that we observe and measure ridiculously well, the concentration of CO2 is one of the best measured things on the planet, how could it not be from those known emissions that we also calculate very precisely? And it's not even the end of the evidence, because we also see the C12-C13 isotope ratio increasing and the C14 ratio decreasing. Both of these are perfectly consistent with a fossil fuel source, not oceanic outgassing or a volcanic source. We can also see O2 ratios decreasing as expected, associated with the combustion of these fossil fuels. These are long-term chemical measurements, not models. These are measured values. By contrast, your counterclaim that the rise in CO2 that we are seeing is due to nature's background emissions that pre-existed the Industrial Revolution by a really long time, that counterclaim fails to explain not just one, but every single one of these different lines of observational evidence that I just cited.
If you're to promote an idea in science, it has to be commensurate with all the other validated work in science.
So why did you say that dumb 97% thing?
Don't you find it remarkable that so many people have bought into this, including very, very intelligent people? We interviewed Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson really believes in what you've been saying and how, this global warming has been influenced and driven by man-made causes.
I'm going to jump in here, Ian, if you don't mind, and give a brief answer first. So as I mentioned, we can establish in at least 5 different ways that the rise in CO2 is due primarily to fossil fuels. We can establish that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that is measured every day. Literally every CO2 measurement device that exists for air conditioning systems or food safety or beer brewing, every single one of those devices works based on the exact same principle that makes CO2 a greenhouse gas, which is its capacity to absorb infrared radiation. We expect to see also fingerprints of this warming if it is indeed due to an enhanced greenhouse effect. These fingerprints include the fact that the days are warming more slowly than the nights, and that the upper atmosphere at all levels, not just the stratosphere, all levels are cooling. Both of these are very well documented with real-world measurements. I'm showing some papers here. There is certainly nothing cyclical either that you can point to, say in the ice core record, that even remotely resembles the current warming trend, and we can literally measure CO2 warming the planet. We can see it with ground station measurements and satellite-based measurements. Both of these literally measure the radiative forcing that it is having, which directly warms the planet. I'm showing all these papers here. Pause and read any one of them. They're all papers which measure the radiative forcing of the greenhouse effect directly. Not model studies, actual real-world data from many different organizations using all kinds of different methodologies, all seeing the same thing. So yeah, that was my very brief answer. Let's see how Ian Plimer answers the question of why do people believe there's a strong connection between CO2 and warming?
We have, in the West, almost completely abandoned Christianity. But we have to have faith in something, and this is the new religion.
Yeah, that was his actual answer. Everything I just said, nah, dog, nah. It's because I've abandoned Christianity and I must have faith in something. You have to have faith in something. That's really what you think? Is that why your entire speech so far has been one trust me bro after the other? Because, see, actual adults base their conclusions on real-world evidence, not faith. You believe in Christianity, and that's fine, but that's faith. It is not based on rigorous scientific evidence. There's no peer-reviewed paper outlining even a single line of direct evidence for the resurrection, and there never will be. This is why you actually need faith for religious belief, not for coming to a conclusion as a result of seeing hard scientific evidence.
So what we're effectively talking about is net zero. And what do you think about the UK's approach to net zero?
Well, I think you should tell your Prime Minister that you breathe in 0.04% carbon dioxide, and because he's metabolising food, he breathes out 4% carbon dioxide. So if he wants to go to net zero, drop dead. That's the solution.
Okay, now this, I made my decision. I know it was close, it was tough, but this needs to be considered the stupidest thing in the entire video. I know there were a lot of contenders. I'm sorry to the losers. I needed to pick one. Food, right? This is an apple. It came from plants. All food comes from plants. I don't care what kind of food it is. Food comes from plants. Plant took in CO2 to create the food. If you eat the food, you eat the carbon that the plant recently took out of the atmosphere. When you exhale carbon, you are putting that back. The net effect is zero. That's what net zero means, and that's why breathing does not actually contribute to the rise in CO2. I don't know, maybe he doesn't know what net means. Like that would explain the second stupidest thing he said too, the thing about the 97% of CO2 emissions being natural. Maybe he doesn't know what the word net means. I don't know. Because literally this is like 6th grade science, right? This is the carbon cycle. A 6th grader knows that eating an apple is not the same as burning a fossil fuel that has been locked out of the carbon cycle for millions of years. Although, you know what? He did say he skipped a grade. Maybe 6th grade was the grade that he skipped. Maybe he missed that lesson. I don't know. Or maybe, what I think anyway, he's not actually this stupid. He knows that the things that he says are wrong, but he says them anyway because he knows that they work. So yeah, is that worse? Is it worse to be stupid or a liar? I don't know. I don't know which one's worse. I don't know which one I'm rooting for here.
We don't get told that carbon dioxide is plant food.
Oh yeah? Then why do I have an entire montage on my channel of media personalities and politicians repeating those exact 5 words verbatim? You're in it too.
2 things. The records haven't been around that long, and the temperature record is a contaminated record. These have a cluster of measurements in the UK, Europe, and the US. Many of them were in rural areas, which are now in cities and suburbs, and so you have the urban heat island effect, and these figures are changed. So the primary data is changed, and often you see that in a rural area, when it's been changed, it gives a warming trend. So I think the data is contaminated, and a number of people have commented on that, including people at climate institutes like your Phil Jones. You've got to be very careful of the records.
Urban heat island effect. You know, I should have like a board up here or something, like a bingo board. Maybe I'll do that for the next video. All of the top talking points that all of these free-thinking, independent-minded skeptics all dutifully parrot, just desperately throwing things at the audience and hoping that anything will stick. Okay, so yes, there is a small effect due to urbanization that has been known about since like the 1980s, and therefore it is corrected for in every instrumental data set. It's nevertheless a small effect, according to this paper, for example, but don't take their word for it. It has been validated. You could, for example, have a study that compares only urban against only rural stations and see if they have a difference. And we have such a paper right here. You can see, found no difference. We also have a paper here that did the same thing, here and here. Also papers that looked at windy nights versus still nights, which is another way to rule out the effect of urbanization. You have papers on that here. And yeah, so none of these studies found any evidence of a significant urbanization bias in the global temperature record. Not to mention the satellite record agrees really well with the instrumental record. So unless there are cities in space...
If you're to promote an idea in science, it has to be commensurate with all the other validated work in science.
Oh, but you know what is contaminated, by the way, are your beloved tree rings that show a cooling since the 1950s, because this has been studied for decades. Of course, tree ring growth does vary by temperature, but they also vary by changes in CO2 levels. and changes in light levels. And that's the main explanation that seems best supported, is that tree rings are diverging from temperature because of global dimming due to, for example, air pollution. So your record that you like so much, tree rings, the one that you only like because it shows you something that you want to see, is certainly being corrupted.
Well, you never have consensus in science. Once you've got consensus, it isn't science.
Yeah, so this claim that there is never any consensus in science. Okay, is there consensus that electrons exist? Or that the Milky Way is not the only galaxy in the universe? Or that continental drift exists? Do you think endlessly debating those examples would be a smart use of time or a waste of time? Because with any field, including climate science, there are elements like that that are so well nailed down. Those pages from the book of how the universe works have been so well read, they will never be unlearned. They will never be disproven. They're on the shelf, and they do not ever need to be taken off the shelf and debated ever again. Now, is every aspect of climate science on that shelf? Of course not. No scientific field is fully defined. This is why research continues. But some aspects, like that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, like that it is rising due to human activities, or like that the planet is warming very rapidly, absolutely are. Now, other questions, like exactly how much it will warm in the future, is certainly an open question, and there is no consensus on the precise value for that number, unfortunately. And I do think you agree with this. Someone who tries to argue those well understood aspects of science does not deserve to be entertained. They should not be debated or taken seriously any more than you would take seriously someone who claims that the continents have always been in their exact position since the beginning of the planet's history. And you not being interested in debating them is not an example of you being some elite ivory tower academic who is putting down an honest, truth-seeking, independent voice. It is simply an example of you recognizing an uneducated nutjob as being not worth your time.
And so many universities now have climate institutes because that's where the money is. Science operates on frightening people if you want a research grant.
How much money are you getting from your book deals, Ian? You know, the ones with the super alarmist titles and covers? Let's see what sounds scarier. Take your book that you're plugging on this podcast and the titles of the last papers published in Nature Climate Change. Which side looks more like the side that is trying to fearmonger for money?
Now, we've had 40 years of models now, and of the 102 major models we have, not one of them has told us what we've measured over the last 40 years. So they don't work.
Actually, Housefather 2020 analyzed climate models published between 1970 and 2007 and found that most were skillful in predicting subsequent global mean surface temperature changes. 14 out of 17 model projections were statistically indistinguishable from what actually occurred. So wrong again.
Because they make one assumption, which is invalid, and that is that carbon dioxide drives temperature.
No, they don't, because that means nothing. Climate models calculate the radiative forcing effect from an increase in CO2. That radiative forcing effect is combined with dozens of other attributes of the climate system, and the simulations that run simulate all the many different physical laws interacting together. It's hard. Predicting a system as complex as a planet's entire atmosphere, land, oceanic interactions is hard, but none of them are based on any assumption that CO2 drives temperature. They're based on the fact that CO2 absorbs infrared radiation at certain wavelengths, and the output of those models is based on those core individual scientific laws. There's all kinds of documentation out there, by the way, for various climate models. Please point to the specific place where they have assumed carbon dioxide drives temperature.
So we had a period after the last glaciation, which ended 14,400 years ago, where the ice sheets broke up and dropped huge amounts of ice into the Atlantic Ocean. We suddenly became cool, and this is a period called the Younger Dryas. And we had temperature drops that were very, very large, like 10 and 15 degrees Celsius drops. And it took about 10 years to have a 15 degrees Celsius rise after the Younger Dryas. Now, that's global warming. What happened in the Younger Dryas? We actually huddled into villages. We fortified those villages. We invented animal husbandry. We invented, for survival, we invented agriculture, where we collected grass seeds and actually grew them. We've got extremely good evidence of that. So in these times of hardship, we humans thrived.
Wait, you want more hardship for the world? Yeah, no, we're good. Thanks. So global population today is over 2,000 times greater than it was during the Younger Dryas. We are not nomadic tribes anymore. Those people did not have coastal cities or significant fractions of the planet covered in farms that depended on predictable precipitation patterns. There were not 8.3 billion people to feed. Our sensitivity to instability in terms of the total suffering it is capable of causing is far greater now than it was back then. A giant climate shift would frankly be a huge pain in the ass to deal with for a society that will certainly have no shortage of other problems already. Yes, we will adapt, just as we adapt to horrible natural disasters that hit, right? Do you think a single survivor of any of those natural disasters would want to do it again just because they were able to adapt to it? Seems to me it would be better to not have the hardship in the first place.
How much of this is about hubris, Ian? Because the way I see it is 1,000 years ago, 14,000 years ago, it gets colder. We look around, we go, it's getting colder. We need to adjust. We need to huddle in the villages. We need to do this. We need to do that. Because we know we can't change what's happening. But now we've become so technologically sophisticated. We're so advanced. We're so competent at solving problems that we almost, I think, are pre-wired to think that every problem that exists as A, has been caused by us, and B, must be solved as opposed to adjusted to. How much of it is simply about the fact that human beings, in line with increasing technological advancement, have become very, very arrogant about their ability?
I think you're absolutely right. If we had another inevitable glaciation, we could solve it technologically. Already in parts of the world there's triple glazing. We could solve it as long as we've got energy that can keep us warm, as long as we've got international trade to bring food from warmer climates. But we saw that in the past. In the peak of the Little Ice Age, we had the Maunder Minimum, and that very cold period was obviously due to sinful humans, and it was deemed that the witches were making the harvests fail. And so witches were rounded up and witches were drowned. And after they stopped drowning the witches, we came out of the Maunder Minimum and it warmed up.
Problem solved.
Problem solved. Evidence was it was witches doing it. So we've been doing this for a long while.
Witches? Really? So equating all of the lines of physical evidence that CO2 is rising due to fossil fuels, that it is a greenhouse gas, that it is creating radiative forcing effect, that we can and do measure with great precision, all of this he is comparing to witch hunts in the Middle Ages. Like, who buys these kind of arguments? I don't understand it. Also, hubris. Like that thing that you said about how if humans run around to burn fossil fuels, all of the plants will be dead. Fossil fuel companies being the savior of all plant life kind of strikes of a lot more hubris than concluding that increasing by 50% atmospheric CO2 might explain 1 degree of warming.
The conversation around net zero has shifted dramatically in the Western world in the last 2 or 3 years. And a lot of people are now coming out and being critical of it for political reasons. They essentially sense which way the wind is blowing. I think there's a lot of that going on as well.
Oh, I do too. I do too, especially in Germany. I think there's been a very significant change there. And that's very much political, but it's also driven by the cost of energy. And the cost of energy now is crippling. In this country, people have to make a decision whether they have a hot bath, whether they have a hot meal, or whether they put on the heating. Now, for a first world country, that's just impossible. That shouldn't happen. So, and people are starting to wake up. These people also vote. And this is why someone who might be pushing a different agenda gets attracted.
You acknowledge that subscribing to the different agenda, i.e. conspiracy theory, that anthropogenic climate change is some kind of hoax, is actually just a political and emotional decision, not one based on objective examination of the scientific evidence. Rare moment of honesty. Cool.
We have people have a decreased longevity in cold periods of time. So we've always known this. And when we look at deaths, there's been a survey done, a medical survey of 34 million deaths related to climate. And more than 90% of people, if they have a climate-related death, is due to the cold, not the warm.
Ah, yes. The cold kills more people than hot. Is that number 10? Are we 10 for 10 on all the most frequently parroted talking points? I wonder if this man has ever had an original thought in his entire life. I don't know. So yes, cold does kill people more than heat. It always has, and still is true. That would matter if the concern about global warming were strictly about the effect of warmth on human physiology, not the full list of climatic changes and the associated effect on sea levels, plants, storm intensity, precipitation patterns, ocean currents, river flows, etc. Remember this chart, by the way? Can we put the time frame in which civilization has existed? Yeah, right there. This time over the past 8,000 years has been exceptionally stable. A massive and rapid climate shift to a different climate would be a pain in the ass to deal with. This is the point. Everything that we have built, every coastal city we have, every tract of arable land, our entire society, our borders, everything was created under the inherent assumption of the climate being the way that it has always been, at least as far back as our own recorded history goes. Climate change is a problem because of its potential to impact human civilization.
Adapt. We've always done it, and there's never been a problem. We are already adapting, and that's the one thing we humans can do. We can adapt, but we can adapt. These things don't happen overnight. Humans have adapted before. We'll do it again.
Yes. Humans have adapted before, and we'll do it again. And would we not, by the way, adapt to massive economic recession? Like the ones you predict due to climate mitigation policies? Or all of your doom and gloom that you spouted on this podcast, which I didn't show, about green energy? Why are you so alarmist about those things if we can just adapt, bro? Like, are you like dual personality or something? Why is a massive climate shift waved away with, oh, we'll just adapt? But an economic shift is sky is falling alarmism from you. I mean, of course, major economic recessions are horrible for many, many people. They cause suffering. We should absolutely try everything we can to avoid them. But like, we would adapt, right? Then he gets into talking about honesty in science, starting off with telling some story about how he published all these geological papers on Broken Hill that were factually wrong.
I mentioned Broken Hill earlier. I had published probably 60 or 80 papers on Broken Hill. I am the authority on Broken Hill. And then when I went back and looked at the data and looked at new data, I thought, wait a minute, I don't think I'm right here. And I published a paper criticising all of my earlier work, saying I was wrong.
He was dead wrong about the thing he's supposed to know best. And his point with this story, is that right? Okay, yeah. The point of the story is that he's a good scientist. Remember, he skipped a grade, you guys. He's super duper smart. And then he just endlessly repeats that science is political because of this pot of money, because again, that's what the people want to hear.
The so-called climate scientists could see that there was a pot of money here. There's a pot of money out there, and scientists got the same weaknesses as everyone else. I don't think science is changing yet because the money's still there. So it's all about the money. If there's a pot of money, they'll try to grab it because that's where the money is. Follow the money.
That's what they want to hear, not what they want to think about. Because if you actually think about this follow the money argument, have you actually thought about it? Because if you have, then you'd have to conclude that receiving funding means the problem is not real. That's the whole point. It's saying follow the money, therefore you find a hoax. Because as we all know, real problems don't get funding. Like literally, you have to conclude that too. Otherwise, follow the money makes no sense. So the only conclusion is that people who make this follow the money argument would expect that if climate change were a real problem in their minds, then it would not get funding. That's the logical dependency that you need to have. You are required to have if you actually want to use this argument. See, there's a reason this follow the money argument is so popular among conspiracy theorists like Ian Plimer.
And virtually every university has a climate institute. And I think they don't ask the simple question, well, whatever we do can't change the global climate. Why are we doing it?
Every university has a climate department. Every university has a geology department too. Does the fact that geologists get funding mean that rocks are fake? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to keep up. All right, and finally the host asks him, if not climate change, what should we care about?
What's the one thing we're not talking about as a society that we really should be?
I think we're not talking about enough about the unstitching of Western society, the attacks on our culture, and the breakdown of society and processes that took thousands of years to build. And that is underpinned by, in many ways, Christianity.
So sea level rise, massive shifts in precipitation, droughts, floods, stronger hurricanes. His answer to all that is, nah, bro, we'll just adapt. Just chill. But a single religion being taken less seriously in a few countries? Guys, this is unadaptable. I mean, how could anybody adapt to not going to church once a week? What else would we do on a Sunday morning? I can't think of anything. So yeah, it must be true. There's no way to adapt to this. Touché, Mr. Plimer. This is definitely the real biggest problem facing society right now. This religion that has, as you know, been around for the blink of an eye in a geological sense, even in a human sense, actually. Humans have been around for about 150,000 years, much longer than Christianity, yet still somehow this decline is hopelessly beyond any form of adaptation. Bravo, bravo. All right, hope you guys enjoyed that. I'll try to do some more of these reaction videos. If you guys have followed my channel for a little while, which, you know, there's maybe not many of you, but I've definitely been super busy lately, just with other things. So it's been what, 3 months since I put out a video or something. I'll try to do it more. I don't think I'm ever gonna stop, but you know, the frequency of uploads is probably gonna be a little bit of a crapshoot over the next year or two. So we'll see. But yeah, thanks you guys for watching, and go ahead, like, subscribe, comment, share if you can. Definitely helps me out. And yeah, see you in the next one.